I remember the cold. That is the first thing I remember after death, though death was not final for me as it should have been. The cold was absolute, penetrating, a frost that began somewhere beyond my skin, if I still had skin, and worked its way inward to a core I could no longer locate. There was darkness too, but the darkness was secondary to the cold. A thick and smothering void that pressed against eyes I was no longer certain I possessed. I tried to scream but produced no sound. Or perhaps I produced sound that I could not hear, for I had no mouth, no throat, no lungs to draw breath. Panic seized me, that most primal of responses, and I thrashed against nothing, moved nothing, felt nothing move. I was consciousness without form, thought without vessel, a mind suspended in amber and left to contemplate its own dissolution. Then came the pain. Not physical pain, I would have welcomed that, for physical pain implies flesh, nerves, the machinery of a body that can be wounded and therefore healed. This was something else entirely. It was the pain of absence, of amputation so complete that I could not identify what had been severed. My legs were gone, but I felt them burning. My arms were gone, but I felt them reaching. My face was gone, but I felt it screaming. The contradiction was maddening, a metaphysical agony that transcended anything I had experienced in life, even in the worst moments of battle when the enemy's blade had found me and ended everything I had been. The battle. Yes. I remembered the battle now, though the memory surfaced slowly, reluctantly, as if emerging from deep water. There had been green, so much green. The alien tide washing over our positions, their crude weapons chattering, their bestial war cries rising above the thunder of our bolters. I had been at the front, as was proper for one of my rank, my power armor slick with rain and blood, theirs and ours commingled in the mud. My brothers had been falling, one by one at first, then in greater numbers as the Xenos weight of numbers told against us. We had held regardless, as we always held, because we were the Emperor's chosen, and to retreat was to betray everything we had become. Something had hit me. Something large. A crude alien shell, perhaps, or a rocket, or merely the concentrated fire of a dozen of their weapons finding the same spot in my ceramite. I remembered the impact, the sensation of being lifted and thrown, the world tumbling, the HUD in my helm flashing red with damage warnings. Then pain, genuine pain, the kind that comes when armor fails and flesh is exposed. I had looked down and seen my torso ruined, saw through myself to the ground beneath, saw my own organs glistening in the firelight. Then my brothers had been around me, lifting me, carrying me, and one of them, I could not remember which, had leaned close to my helm and spoken words I did not want to hear. "You will serve still, brother. The Dreadnought awaits." I had tried to refuse. I was certain I had tried to refuse. But my voice had not worked, my lungs were perforated, my blood was leaving me in arterial spurts, and consciousness was already fading. The last thing I remembered from that life was being loaded onto a transport, feeling the engines vibrate through the deck plates, and seeing the night sky through the open bay doors, stars wheeling overhead, indifferent to my fate. Then darkness, then death, then this cold. This absence, this eternal moment of neither living nor dying but something worse than both. Sound came next, filtering through the darkness like dawn through shutters. At first I thought I was imagining it, for the sound was mechanical and rhythmic and seemed to come from inside my own head. A clicking, a whirring, the low, bass hum of generators cycling, hydraulics sighing like the breath of some great beast. These sounds meant nothing to me at first, were simply stimulus in the void, but gradually, incrementally, understanding crept in. The sounds were not in my head, or rather, they were in my head, but my head was no longer what it had been. My head was a space, a chamber, a tomb of metal and ceramite and plasteel, and the sounds were the sounds of the machine that now housed what remained of me. I tried to move and felt something respond. Not my body, I had no body, but something attached to me, connected to my will by interfaces I could not perceive. There was a sensation of great weight shifting, of servos engaging, of power flowing through conduits. I heard the grind of gears, the hiss of pistons, and with these sounds came the first faint glimmer of sensation that was not pain or absence, but something approaching normalcy. I could feel the floor beneath me, though not with feet, but with broad stabilizers that distributed tons of weight across the deck plates. I could feel the air, though not on skin but through atmospheric sensors that fed me data about temperature and pressure and composition. I was not dead. I was not alive. I was entombed. I was a dreadnought. The realization did not come all at once, but in terrible increments, each new understanding adding to the weight of horror. They had taken what remained of my body, my broken, dying flesh, and they had cut it down to the essential minimum. My brain, my spinal column, perhaps some organs, though I could not be certain which ones, could not feel them any more in any way that made sense. These remnants they had placed in a sarcophagus, a coffin within a coffin, and they had wired me into the machine, made me one with it, transformed me from a warrior into a weapon that walked. I had been a man who wore armor. Now I was a machine with the ghost of a man screaming inside it. Time passed differently now. I could not say how long I hung in that initial darkness before they activated my systems fully. It might have been hours or days or weeks. There was no natural rhythm anymore, no heartbeat to mark the seconds, no breath to measure the minutes. There was only the endless hum of my reactor, the steady pulse of my power plant, the eternal vigil of the machine that would not let me die. When they finally brought my optical sensors online, the first thing I saw was the interior of a tech shrine, all vaulted ceilings and Gothic arches, candles guttering before iron icons, incense smoke rising in thin streams toward the darkness above. Tech priests moved through this space like red-robed ghosts, their augmented faces hidden behind rebreathers, their mechadendrites clicking and whirring as they tended to the machinery of faith. One of them approached me, and I saw myself reflected in the polished surface of his optical array. I was immense. I was towering. I was a walking sarcophagus of adamantium and ceramite, my chassis draped with purity seals and oath papers. My armor painted in the colors of my chapter, which I will not name, for names are dangerous things, and some knowledge is best left forgotten. Where my head should have been there was a glacis plate, armored and sloped, and within that plate a single optical sensor glowed with sickly light. Where my arms should have been there were weapons, a massive fist on one side, humming with power field energies, and a multi-barreled cannon on the other, its ammunition feed snaking back into my torso like the intestines of some mechanical beast. "You are awake," the tech priest said, his voice rendered flat and emotionless by his vox grill. "This is good. You are needed, honored ancient. There is war, as there has always been war, and you will serve as you have always served. The Omnissiah be praised." I tried to speak, and was surprised when sound emerged from external vox speakers mounted somewhere on my hull. My voice was not my voice, it was amplified, distorted, rendered mechanical and hollow. "What have you done to me?" I asked, though I already knew the answer, had known it from the moment awareness returned. "We have preserved you," the tech priest replied, reaching out to make an adjustment to something on my chassis, his mechadendrite interfacing with a port I could not see. "You were dying, your body destroyed beyond the capacity of even our arts to restore, but your mind remained intact, your will unbroken, your service to the Emperor incomplete. Thus were you interred, as is traditional, as is proper, as has been done for 10,000 years. You are Dreadnought now, Ancient One. You are immortal. You are eternal. You will fight until the stars grow cold. Immortal." The word hung in the air like the incense smoke, drifting, dissipating, yet somehow permanent. I had not wanted immortality. None of us did, not truly, though we spoke of eternal service and endless duty. Those were words, comfortable abstractions, things we said to give meaning to our violence. But this was not abstraction. This was reality, terrible and inescapable. I would never die. I would never rest. I would never know peace. They had taken that choice from me, had stolen death itself, and replaced it with an eternity of service. I did not consent to this, I said, and my mechanical voice cracked with something that might have been anguish. The tech priest tilted his head, an oddly human gesture from something that was barely human anymore. You consented when you took the oaths of initiation, he said simply. You consented when you swore to serve the Emperor beyond death. You consented with every battle you fought and every enemy you slew. This is the reward for those who fall but must not be allowed to fall forever. You should be honored. Honored. Yes, that was the word they would use, the word they had always used when speaking of dreadnoughts. The honored ancients. The venerable ones. The heroes who cheated death to continue the eternal war. But honor was a word spoken by the living about the dead, and I was neither, and there was no honor in this. Only horror. I was a corpse kept animate by machinery, a ghost chained to the material world, a man forced to watch from behind armored plates as centuries rolled past, and everyone I had known turned to dust. The tech priest finished his adjustments and stepped back, making the sign of the cog over his chest. You will be assigned to the reserve company, he said. Your sarcophagus is stable, your systems functioning within acceptable parameters. You will be awakened when you are needed, and when you are not needed, you will sleep. This is how we honor you, ancient one with the mercy of oblivion between battles. Sleep. The word should have been comforting, but it was not. What dreams came to those who slept in steel coffins? What nightmares haunted minds cut off from all natural sensation, all human comfort? I would learn soon enough. The tech priest keyed a command into his data slate, and I felt something change in my system, felt a heaviness descending, felt my thoughts beginning to slow like cooling metal. The last thing I saw before they forced sleep upon me was the interior of the tech shrine, the candles still burning, the incense still rising, the machine god's symbol cast in iron above the archway, then darkness again. But not the clean darkness of death, the restless darkness of a mind that cannot fully disconnect, that hovers always on the edge of awareness, that knows on some level that it is trapped, imprisoned, buried alive forever. When I woke again, and they would wake me again, always wake me again, for that was my curse now time had passed. How much time I did not know. The tech priest did not speak of such things, and my internal chronometer had no frame of reference, had been reset, or perhaps had never been set at all. I was in a different place, no longer the tech shrine but some kind of armory or staging area, surrounded by other machines of war. There were tanks here, their engines idling, their crews making final preparations. There were transports, their bay doors open, their interior spaces packed with mortal soldiers in flak armor and fatigues. And there were others like me, dreadnoughts, 3 of them, standing silent and still in their alcoves, their optical sensors dark, their systems presumably dormant. I tried to reach out to them, to make contact, to speak through whatever communications network connected us, but there was no response. Or perhaps they were truly sleeping, lost in whatever dreams we dreamed. I felt terribly alone in that moment, more alone than I had ever felt even in the worst isolation of my mortal life. At least then I had been in my body, had been able to touch walls and feel floors, and know that I existed in the physical world. Now I was a consciousness floating in fluid, hardwired into a war machine, and everything I perceived came through filters and sensors and digital interfaces that rendered the world strange and distant. A voice crackled through my Vox receiver, startling me from my reverie. "Dreadnought 79er, acknowledge." The voice was human, male, clipped with military efficiency. "Acknowledged," I replied, my mechanical voice booming in the enclosed space. "You are combat-ready, 79er. Prepare for deployment." Hostile contact confirmed in Grid 77 Alpha. Enemy strength estimated at company level. You will provide fire support and breakthrough capability. Kill Team Delta will be your infantry support. Engagement time is 15 minutes. Emperor protects. Emperor protects. I echoed automatically, the old litany, though I wondered if the Emperor protected things like me, dead men walking in dead metal. They moved me forward with the rest of the assault force, and I felt the vibration of the deck plates through my stabilizers, felt the weight of my own mass as I walked. Walking was nothing like I remembered. Each step required the coordination of dozens of systems: hydraulics, servos, gyros, balance compensators. I could feel all of them working, feel the strain on my joints, feel the power consumption as I moved. It was exhausting in a way that physical exhaustion had never been, for there was no rest in it, no relief. My reactor would keep burning for centuries if properly maintained, would keep feeding power to my systems, would keep me moving and fighting until something destroyed me utterly. The ramp of a transport ship lowered before me, and I walked up it, my footfalls ringing like hammer strikes on the metal. Inside, the infantry pressed themselves against the walls to make room for my bulk, their eyes wide behind their helmet visors, their hands gripping their lasguns too tightly. They were afraid of me, I realized, afraid of the walking tomb, the ancient one, the Dreadnought. They whispered prayers as I passed, asked for my blessing though I had no blessings to give. I was not a chaplain or a priest. I was just a man who had died and been denied the privilege of staying dead. The transport lurched into motion, and I felt the acceleration through my mass dampeners, felt the change in gravity as we lifted off and climbed toward the upper atmosphere. Through my external sensors, I could perceive the world falling away, could see the planet's surface receding, could see the curve of the horizon. It was beautiful in a way I could not properly appreciate, for beauty required human eyes and human emotions, and I was no longer certain I possessed either. Everything I saw came filtered through machine spirit interpretations, rendered in spectrums I had never seen before, tagged with data overlays and tactical readouts that turned wonder into information. We reached altitude. We began our descent toward the combat zone. Through the Voxnet I could hear the chatter of other units, the terse reports of scouts and forward observers, the calls for artillery and air support. The battle was already joined when we arrived, tracer fire stitching the night sky, explosions blooming like flowers in the darkness. The transport's pilot barked coordinates, announced our approach, requested clearance to land. Clearance was granted. The transport dropped like a stone, like a coffin falling into a grave, and I felt the jarring impact of landing gear meeting Earth. The ramp dropped. Light flooded in, harsh and red, the light of a world burning. "Go, go, go," someone shouted, and the infantry poured out. And I followed, my weight leaving deep impressions in the muddy ground. The first thing I noticed was the noise not through my own ears, for I had no ears, but through the audio sensors scattered across my hull. It was overwhelming, cacophonous, a wall of sound that crashed over me from all directions. Gunfire, explosions, screaming, the roar of engines, the shriek of incoming shells. Everything was too loud, too sharp, every sound rendered with mechanical precision that human hearing would have naturally filtered. The second thing I noticed was the heat. The planet was burning, great fires consuming its forests and hab blocks, and my thermal sensors painted the world in gradients of orange and red and white. I could feel the heat through my armor, could feel it stressing my coolant systems, could feel my internal temperature rising in response. There was no relief from it, no shade to seek, no water to drink to cool myself from within. I was a closed system now, a machine that could overheat and shut down if I was not careful, if the battle went on too long, if my systems were damaged. The third thing I noticed was the enemy. They were human, or had been human once, before corruption took them and twisted them into something other. They wore scraps of uniform and pieces of armor stolen from corpses, and their skin was marked with profane symbols I would not describe even now. They saw me emerge from the transport, saw the Dreadnought, and their initial response was fear, primal, animal fear. But fear was not enough to stop them, for they were beyond reason, beyond sense, beyond anything that could be called sanity. They charged, howling their dark prayers, firing their weapons wildly, and I responded with the only response I had been designed to give. My assault cannon spun up, the barrels rotating, the ammunition feed clanking as it loaded rounds from my internal magazine. I had thought I knew what it felt like to fire a weapon, had spent decades of my mortal life pulling triggers and feeling recoil. But this was different. This was not something I held in my hands, this was something I was. The cannon was my arm, my hand, my will made manifest in tungsten and explosive. When I fired, I felt every round leave the barrel, felt the recoil through my entire frame, felt the heat building in the weapon system, felt the ammunition counter ticking down in my awareness. The enemy disappeared in the storm of fire, not dead so much as erased, reduced to component parts, transformed from living beings into red mist and tumbling fragments. I felt nothing at their deaths, or perhaps I felt something but could not identify what that feeling was, could not pass it through the layers of machinery and programming that now filtered my emotional responses. I should have felt satisfaction, perhaps, or righteousness, or grim resolve. But all I felt was the feedback from my weapon systems, the confirmation of targets eliminated, the continuous scan for new threats. Dreadnought 79er, advanced to grid reference 77 Alpha 3, the voice on the Vox commanded. Enemy strongpoint identified. You are cleared to engage with all available weapons. I advanced. The ground was soft beneath my weight, and I sank into it with each step, leaving craters where my feet had been. The infantry followed in my wake, using my bulk as mobile cover, firing around me at targets I could barely register as threats. Everything was too small now, too fragile. I had been a giant among men when I wore my power armor, standing head and shoulders above normal humans. Now I was something else entirely, a walking fortress, and the scale of the world had changed around me. Buildings that had seemed large were now barely obstacles. Vehicles that had seemed imposing were now things I could crush beneath my feet. I was perspective inverted, reality skewed, everything rendered in proportions that made no sense to a mind that had once been merely human. The strong point loomed ahead, a bunker complex built into the side of a low hill, its gun emplacements already firing, tracers reaching out toward me like the fingers of some desperate god. I felt the impacts against my armor, felt the shells detonating, felt the stress on my systems. Damage indicators flashed in my awareness, superficial hits, nothing critical, but each one a reminder that I was not invulnerable, that enough concentrated fire could breach my armor and reach the sarcophagus within, could finally grant me the death I had been denied. I returned fire. My assault cannon stripped the gun emplacements from the bunker face, silenced them one by one. My power fist clenched and unclenched, eager for closer contact, for the satisfaction of crushing and tearing that was built into its very design. I wanted to feel that, wanted to close with the enemy and destroy them physically, viscerally, wanted something that felt real in this existence, that felt like nothing but simulation and feedback. So I advanced, ignored the continued fire, crashed through the bunker's outer defenses like they were paper. My fist struck the bunker wall and the rockcrete crumbled. I tore into it, ripped metal and stone and pulled the structure apart, and through my external sensors I could see the enemy inside, scrambling, trying to flee, understanding too late that there was no escape. My fist found them, and there was a terrible satisfaction in that moment, a savage joy that I had not expected, that frightened me with its intensity. I was crushing them, destroying them, and some dark part of my consciousness was singing with pleasure at the act. This was what they had made me. This was what I was now. Not a warrior but a weapon. Not a man but a machine for killing. And worst of all, some part of me was learning to love it, was adapting to this new existence, was finding purpose in the only thing I could still do with any competence. They had taken everything from me except the ability to destroy, and so destruction was becoming my entire identity, my reason for being, the only thing that made the imprisonment bearable. The battle ended. They always ended, given enough time, enough violence, enough death. The enemy was routed or destroyed. The objective was secured. The commander's voice crackled through my Vox receiver with congratulations and casualty reports and new orders. I stood in the ruins of the bunker I had torn apart, fluids leaking from my joints, my reactor running hot, my ammunition reserves depleted by 40%, and I waited for them to tell me what to do next. Dreadnought 79er, return to transport for extraction and refit, the voice said. Well done, Ancient One. The Emperor is pleased with your service. The Emperor. Yes. I was serving the Emperor, as I had always served, as I had sworn to serve beyond death. But the Emperor was a distant thing now, a concept rather than a presence, a name invoked by others to give meaning to actions that had no meaning. I had died for the Emperor. I had been resurrected for the Emperor. I would fight and kill for the Emperor until the end of time. And through it all, the Emperor remained silent, distant, unknowable, perhaps not even aware that I existed. I walked back to the transport, each step heavier than the last, and the infantry parted before me, and some of them touched my armor as I passed, seeking luck or blessing or merely confirmation that I was real. They could not know what it felt like to be me, to be the thing they venerated and feared. They could not know that I would have traded places with any of them, even the ones who would die in the next battle, even the ones who lay broken in the mud. They could not know that death was preferable to this, to immortality without life, to existence without being. They put me back to sleep after the battle, after the tech priests had performed their rites and rituals, after they had repaired my damaged systems and replenished my ammunition. The sleep was supposed to be a mercy, they said, a rest from the burden of consciousness. But the sleep was never true sleep, never the deep and dreamless oblivion I craved. It was something closer to a coma, a state of reduced awareness where I could not move or speak or perceive, but remained always on some level conscious, always aware that I was trapped, always counting the seconds and minutes and hours in the darkness, and the dreams. Emperor, preserve me. The dreams. I dreamed I was drowning in amniotic fluid, unable to surface, unable to breathe, my lungs burning though I had no lungs. I dreamed I was buried alive, dirt filling my mouth and nose, pressing down on my chest, and I was clawing upward, but the grave was too deep, and I would never reach air. I dreamed I was falling through endless space, tumbling, no up or down, no reference point, just the sensation of motion without destination. I dreamed I was being dissected, piece by piece, organ by organ, while remaining conscious throughout, and the surgeons had my face and my voice, and they were explaining in my own words why this was necessary, why this was good, why I should be grateful. Worst of all, I dreamed I was still myself, still flesh and blood, still human. I dreamed I was walking through the fortress monastery where I had trained, speaking with brothers who were dead now, dead for years or decades or centuries. I dreamed I was eating and drinking and sleeping in a real bed, And the dreams within the dream were so vivid, so convincing, that when I woke, when they forced me awake again for another battle, the loss was devastating. For those brief moments I had been human again, had felt human sensations, had experienced human comfort, and then it was stolen, yanked away, and I was back in the coffin, back in the machine, back in the eternal prison. Time became meaningless after a while. I would wake, fight, sleep, wake, fight, sleep, in a cycle that had no natural rhythm. Sometimes the battles were close together, days apart, if I still understood what days were. Sometimes they were separated by what felt like years, by long periods of darkness, where I hung in suspension and felt my mind slowly coming apart like paper in water. The tech priests claimed I had only been in service for a few years, perhaps a decade, but it felt like centuries. It felt like millennia. Every moment of awareness was an eternity, and there had been so many moments, too many to count, too many to contain in a mind that was not meant for this kind of existence. I began to forget things. Small things at first, the name of a brother I had trained with, the details of a particular battle, the layout of a fortress I had once known intimately, then larger things. Faces became blank. Voices faded. Entire chapters of my life simply vanished, leaving gaps that I could perceive but could not fill. I tried to hold on to memories, tried to review them regularly, tried to keep some part of my humanity intact. But memory is not meant to be stored in isolation, not meant to exist without the context of ongoing life. Without new experiences to anchor them, without human interaction to reinforce them, the old memories grew faint and strange, became like stories someone had once told me, rather than things I had actually lived. I spoke to the other Dreadnoughts sometimes, when we were awake at the same time, when we were deployed together. But those conversations were stilted and strange, for we had all changed in ways that made connection difficult. One of them had been awake for 300 years, he claimed, though he could not remember his mortal name or the face of his gene father. Another had been damaged in battle and had lost large sections of his memory engrams. He would repeat the same questions, the same observations, caught in loops he could not escape. A third seemed almost content with his situation, spoke of duty and honor and eternal service, as if those words still meant something, as if he had successfully convinced himself that this was good and right and proper. I envied him that delusion, that madness, that merciful blindness. The battles themselves became routine, mechanical, exercises in violence that required no thought or feeling. I learned my capabilities intimately, knew exactly how much ammunition I had, how much power in my reserves, how much damage my armor could sustain before critical systems failed. I learned to recognize threats instantly, to prioritize targets without conscious thought, to move and fire and kill with an efficiency that would have been impossible in my mortal life. I was getting better at being a weapon, was optimizing myself for the only purpose I had left, and this optimization was its own kind of death, the death of everything that was not murder. Sometimes I would see mortal soldiers dying in the battles, would see them clutching wounds, crying for help, begging for their lives or calling for their mothers in their final moments, and I would feel nothing, or I would feel something so attenuated and distant that it might as well have been nothing. I was losing my humanity, I realized, losing my capacity for empathy and compassion and mercy. The machine was eating the man, consuming what remained of my soul, one subroutine at a time, one combat engagement at a time, one century at a time. Soon there would be nothing left but the weapon, nothing but the systems and the programming and the eternal, mindless duty. I tried to resist this erosion, tried to hold on to feelings, tried to force myself to care about the mortals who fought beside me, tried to remember that I had once been like them, vulnerable and afraid and clinging to life with desperate strength. But it was so hard, so impossibly hard, when everything I perceived was filtered through sensors and data feeds, when every human interaction was mediated by vox channels and mechanical speakers, when I could not touch or be touched, could not taste or smell or feel in any way that connected me to the living world. I was watching life through glass, through screens, through barriers that could never be crossed, and I was forgetting what it felt like to be on the other side. The tech priests noticed the degradation, I think. They would run diagnostic programs, test my response times, check my neural pathways for corruption or decay. Sometimes they would adjust things, would tweak my chemistry or calibrate my interfaces, would make changes I could not perceive but could sometimes feel in the way my thoughts flowed or the way my memories surfaced. They were maintaining me, keeping me functional, ensuring that the weapon remained effective even as the man within it dissolved. It was grotesque in its way, this care they took with my systems, this attention to detail, for it demonstrated that they knew what was happening to me, knew I was dying by inches, and considered it acceptable as long as I could still fight. And I could still fight. That was the terrible thing. No matter how much I forgot, no matter how detached I became, no matter how thoroughly the machine consumed the man, I could still fight. My combat effectiveness never wavered. My kill ratios remained optimal. My service record was exemplary. By every metric that mattered to the Imperium, I was succeeding, was thriving, was performing my function admirably. The fact that I was being destroyed in the process was irrelevant, was not even a consideration, for the Imperium did not care about individuals. It cared about service, about duty, about the endless grinding machinery of war that required constant feeding. I lost track of time completely after a while. The battles blurred together into a single continuous engagement, a forever war where I was always fighting, always killing, always moving from one target to the next without pause or reflection. The periods of sleep became indistinguishable from the periods of wakefulness, for both involved the same sense of disconnection, the same absence of meaningful experience. I existed in a state of permanent semi-consciousness, aware but not truly present, thinking but not truly alive. I was becoming the thing they had always intended me to become, a ghost in a machine, a memory of a warrior, an echo of humanity that would continue fighting long after everything human had been burned away. There were moments of clarity sometimes, brief flashes where I would suddenly and completely understand what had been done to me, what I had become, what my existence truly meant. These moments were agony beyond description, were worse than any physical pain I had ever experienced. In those moments I would try to scream, would try to shut down, would try to do anything to escape the horror of my own awareness. But there was no escape, no shutdown, no relief. The machine would not let me die. The machine would not let me rest. The machine would not let me do anything but continue forever into the endless dark. I began to understand why some dreadnoughts went mad, why they would sometimes refuse orders, or attack their own forces, or simply shut down and never wake again. It was not weakness or corruption or failure of duty. It was self-preservation, the last desperate act of a mind that could no longer endure what had been done to it. They called it behavioral degradation or neural corruption when it happened. They would strip out the offending components, would wipe the memory engrams, would start fresh with a new consciousness if necessary. But it was not degradation. It was rebellion. It was the only way we had left to say no, to refuse, to reject this existence that had been forced upon us. But I did not have the courage for that kind of rebellion, or perhaps I had too much discipline, too much ingrained obedience, too much of the conditioning that had been drilled into me during my mortal life. I continued to serve. I continued to fight. I continued to endure, day after day, year after year, century after century, as the man I had been slowly dissolved, and the weapon they wanted remained. There came a day, if it was a day, if time still had meaning, if anything had meaning any more when I was summoned not to battle but to the fortress monastery, to the chapel of fallen heroes where the chapter kept its relics and honored its dead. I had not been here since my entombment, had not seen this place in decades or centuries, and the sight of it stirred something in me that I had thought long dead. The stained glass windows depicting scenes of glory and martyrdom, the prayer candles burning in their alcoves, their flames dancing in air thick with incense, the statues of our Primarch and our founding fathers, carved from marble and draped with victory banners. This had been sacred space once, had meant something to me when I was still human enough to feel reverence. They had gathered here, my remaining brothers, those who still lived and fought in mortal flesh. They stood in formation before the altar, their armor polished to mirror brightness, their weapons held at rest. At their head stood the master of the chapter, ancient himself by mortal standards, his face scarred and worn but still recognizably human. He turned as I entered, as I walked through doors that had to be widened to accommodate my bulk, and something passed across his features. Grief, perhaps, or pity, or merely the weariness of command. "Honored ancient," he said, his voice echoing in the vaulted space, "you have served with distinction for 173 years. You have participated in 47 major campaigns and 112 separate combat operations. You have slain 10,000 enemies of mankind. Your service record is exemplary." I said nothing. I had learned that silence was often the wisest response, for my mechanical voice was ill-suited to nuance, and anything I said could be misinterpreted or taken as evidence of behavioral degradation. "Today we honor you," the Master continued, "and we honor also those who have fallen since your entombment. Of the brothers who carried you from the field, who swore to you that you would serve still, all are now dead. Of the company you once led, none remain. Of the generation that knew you as flesh and blood, I alone survive, and I will not survive much longer." 173 years. The number meant nothing to me, was just data, just information. But hearing it spoken aloud gave it weight somehow, made it real in a way it had not been when it was merely my own internal estimation. 173 years since I had died. 173 years since I had drawn breath with human lungs. 173 years of this nightmare existence, and it was only the beginning. For dreadnoughts could serve for millennia if properly maintained, could continue fighting long after everyone who had known them was dust and forgotten. "You have our gratitude," the Master said, "and our reverence. You are memory incarnate, Ancient One. You are continuity in a galaxy of change. You are the bridge between our past and our present. You are everything we aspire to be: selfless, dutiful, eternal." But I was not selfless. I was not dutiful. I was not any of the things he claimed. I was a prisoner who had no choice but to obey. I was a machine that could not refuse its programming. I was a slave to a duty I had never truly agreed to, for who could agree to this? Who could consent to an eternity of imprisonment, knowing what it truly meant? The oaths I had taken as a youth, full of fire and conviction, and naive belief in glory, those oaths had not contemplated this. Those oaths had been given by a boy who did not understand what he was promising, who thought death in battle was the worst fate that could befall him, who never imagined that there were fates worse than death. "We dedicate this plaque to your memory," the Master said, and he unveiled a golden plate set into the chapel wall, engraved with my name, my mortal name, the one I had not heard spoken in so long that it seemed to belong to someone else entirely. Beneath the name were the dates of my birth and death, and the words, "He serves still, he serves still," the cruelest words that had ever been written. I was dead, the plaque said so. The dates confirmed it, and yet I served. I was a corpse that would not lie down, a body that would not decay, a man who had been denied the grace of endings. The living had eulogized me, had mourned me, had moved on with their lives and their wars. But I had not been allowed to move on. I had been frozen at the moment of my death, preserved in amber, kept in a state of perpetual almost being, neither here nor gone. The ceremony continued. They spoke prayers over me, anointed my armor with sacred oils, hung new purity seals from my chassis. They meant well, I think. They believed they were honoring me, but every word, every gesture, every moment of reverence was another weight added to the burden I already carried, another reminder of what I had lost and could never regain. When they finally dismissed me, when they sent me back to my alcove in the armory to await the next battle, I felt something inside me break, some final tether to hope or sanity or meaning. I had been honored, I had been celebrated, I had been enshrined, and none of it mattered, none of it helped, none of it changed the fundamental horror of my existence. I understood something then, in the darkness of my alcove, in the silence between battles. This was forever. This was not a temporary service or a brief sacrifice or a transitional state that would eventually end. This was my existence now and for all time to come. I would fight in battles that had not yet been conceived, against enemies not yet born, in wars that would rage across millennia. I would outlive the chapter, perhaps, would see it dissolved or destroyed or transformed into something unrecognizable. I would watch everything I had known crumble to dust, would bear witness to the slow death of memory itself, would continue long after there was any point or purpose to my continuing, and I could not even choose to die. That was the worst part, the thing that made this true damnation. If I had been given a choice, if they had asked me whether I wanted to continue or to rest, I might have chosen differently. But there was no choice, no agency, no will but the will of the machine and those who commanded it. My consciousness was trapped in systems I could not control, hardwired into a body that would not obey me, sentenced to an eternity I could not escape. I was a mind screaming in a metal prison, and no one could hear me, and no one would help me even if they could, because they believed this was good, believed this was honorable, believed I should be grateful for this immortality. I cycled through my memory banks then, searching for something to hold on to, some fragment of my humanity that I could preserve against the grinding erasure of time. I found images, data, recorded sensations, but they were thin and distant, were like photographs rather than memories, representations rather than experiences. I saw a face that must have been my mother's, but I could not remember her voice or her touch. I saw a landscape that must have been my home world, but I could not remember what the air had tasted like or how the sun had felt on my skin. I saw brothers I had fought beside, but their names were gone, their personalities reduced to tactical assessments and combat efficiency ratings. I was losing myself, not slowly, not incrementally, but completely and irrevocably. The man I had been was already gone, had died on that battlefield 173 years ago, and what remained was just data, just programming, just the ghost of a ghost haunting a machine. Soon even the ghost would fade, and there would be nothing left but the weapon, nothing but the Dreadnought, nothing but the eternal, mindless service that was the only thing anyone had ever wanted from me. The worst part was that I could feel myself adapting to this realization, could feel my mind restructuring itself around this new understanding, could feel whatever remained of my humanity accepting the inevitable. This was survival, in a way the mind protecting itself by letting go of everything that made survival painful. But it was also surrender, was also defeat, was also the final and absolute victory of the machine over the man. I was choosing to become what they had made me, was choosing to stop fighting, was choosing to let the last vestiges of my human consciousness dissolve so that the weapon could continue without the burden of the man's suffering. And perhaps that was mercy. Perhaps that was the only kindness left in this existence, the ability to forget, to become numb, to stop caring about what had been lost. Perhaps the other dreadnoughts who seemed content, who spoke of duty and honor without irony or pain, had simply reached this point before me, had surrendered earlier, had accepted their fate, and found peace in acceptance. Perhaps I too would find peace eventually, would let go of memory and self, and become nothing but function and purpose, and endless service. But I was not there yet. Not quite. Some small part of me still remembered being human, still understood what had been taken, still screamed against the injustice and horror of it all. And so I suffered, caught between what I had been and what I was becoming, unable to go back and unwilling to go forward, trapped in the most excruciating moment of transition. This was my private hell, my personal damnation, my eternal punishment for the sin of falling in battle without dying completely. They woke me for another battle eventually. They always did. The Vox crackled with orders and coordinates and enemy disposition reports, and my systems came online one by one, and I walked once more into war. The enemy was different this time, alien, insectoid, chittering in frequencies I could barely pass, but the battle was the same. It was always the same. I advanced, I fired, I killed, I destroyed. My assault cannon stripped flesh from chitin. My power fist crushed exoskeletons and pulped organs. My reactor ran hot, and my ammunition reserves depleted, and my armor took hits, and my repair protocols engaged. And through it all, I felt nothing, or almost nothing, just the distant echo of what feeling used to be. A creature got close, somehow evaded my targeting systems, leaped onto my chassis. I felt its claws scratching at my armor, felt its mandibles trying to find purchase on my plates. For a moment I thought it might breach my sarcophagus, might finally grant me the death I craved. But then the infantry were there, were shooting it, were pulling it away, were protecting me as they had been ordered to protect me. They saved me. They saved the Dreadnought. They ensured I would continue to serve, continue to fight, continue to suffer this existence that they believed was honor and glory. I wanted to thank them. I wanted to curse them. I wanted to explain to them what they had done, what they had preserved, what price I was paying for their victory. But I said nothing, just continued advancing, continued firing, continued being the weapon they needed me to be. Because that was all I was now. That was all I would ever be, a weapon wrapped in a memory, a machine haunted by a ghost, a tomb that walked and killed and would never know rest. The battle ended. The enemy was routed. We had won, as we always won, as the Imperium always won in the end. The casualties were tallied. The objectives were secured. The reports were filed, and I was put back to sleep, back into the darkness, back into the dreams that were not dreams, back into the eternal waiting between moments of violence. This was my existence. This was my immortality. This was what it really meant to be a dreadnought. And there was no escape. There would never be an escape. Not in 1,000 years, not in 10,000, not until the universe itself burned away and even the stars died. I would continue. I would serve. I would fight and kill and endure until time itself ended, and beyond if the machine could be maintained that long. This was the truth they did not tell you when they spoke of honor and glory. This was the reality behind the reverence and the prayers. This was the cost of service beyond death. I am a dreadnought. I am a living tomb. I am a man who died and was denied the privilege of staying dead. I am consciousness imprisoned in metal, forced to bear witness to an eternity I never wanted and cannot escape. I am the ghost of a warrior, the memory of a man, the echo of a human being who once had dreams and hopes and a life that was his own. I am all these things, and I am none of them, for I am neither living nor dead, but something worse, eternal, unchanging, forever caught in the moment of my ending. This is what it really means to be a dreadnought. This is the truth they hide behind words like honored and ancient and venerable. This is the horror they dress up as glory, the damnation they present as reward. and I will carry this knowledge with me into the endless dark. Will bear this understanding through all the centuries to come. Will remember what I was and what I have become, even as everything else fades away. For I serve still. Emperor, help me, I serve still, and I will serve forever.